The city was quiet that night, but not peaceful. Rain fell in slow, steady sheets, and puddles on the cobblestone streets reflected the dim glow of lanterns. Shadows stretched long and deep between buildings, and whispers of old legends drifted through the alleys. Some said the city was alive, carrying secrets of betrayal, loyalty, and bloodlines older than any king. Alara moved silently through the empty streets. She carried a small satchel filled with herbs, bandages, and vials of healing oils. Her home was small and tucked away at the edge of the city, surrounded by thorned gardens and walls that seemed to guard more than just her. She had learned long ago to live quietly, keeping to herself, tending the sick and wounded in secret. People whispered that her hands carried a rare skill, almost magical, though no one knew the truth. That night, as she turned the corner near her home, she noticed a figure slumped in the rain. The figure was masked and his coat was torn and soaked. Blood stained the fabric near his shoulder, and his breathing was uneven, shallow. Without thinking, Alara ran to him. "Please," she whispered, dropping her satchel to the ground. "You're bleeding. You'll die if I don't help you." The man's eyes, visible through the mask, flashed with something wild. Danger, fear, and a quiet pain that tugged at her heart. He tried to speak, but a groan escaped instead. His strength seemed drained, yet even in weakness he carried an air of power, of command. Alara worked quickly. She tore strips of cloth from her satchel and pressed them to his wound. Her hands moved with practiced precision and her voice remained calm, soothing. "You're safe here," she said softly. "I won't let anything happen to you." He flinched under her touch, his pride wounded more than his body. "I don't need your help," he said, his voice low, rough, almost dangerous. "You do," she replied firmly. "And if you won't accept it, you'll die." For a long moment he stared at her. His eyes were sharp, cold, but something else flickered. Curiosity, hesitation, maybe even a strange gratitude. Slowly he let her continue. She cleaned the wound carefully, whispering words of comfort as she worked. Outside, the storm raged on, lightning cutting through the night sky, thunder rolling like the drums of war. The city seemed to hold its breath. "I'm Alara," she said, finally meeting his gaze. "You can tell me your name." He hesitated. "Lucian," he said at last, the word sharp, carrying the weight of 1,000 secrets. "But it doesn't matter. No one should know it. Especially not you." Alara studied him silently. There was something about him. Something more than fear or danger. He was a man who had seen the darkest corners of life, who had carried burdens no one could imagine. And yet beneath the danger there was a vulnerability he refused to show. She finished dressing his wound and handed him a small vial of water. "Drink," she urged. "You've lost too much blood." He took it reluctantly, his fingers brushing hers. For a moment the world outside seemed to disappear. Rain fell, thunder rolled, but all that existed was the space between them, the strange pull that neither could deny. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered after drinking. "If they find me, who?" she asked softly. "Who would find you?" His eyes darkened. "Enemies. People who would kill anyone who helps me. Anyone." Ilara's heart tightened. "Then you need to stay hidden," she said. "At least until you can leave safely. You can trust me here." He shook his head. "I can't trust anyone." "Then trust the house," she said quietly. "It will protect you." Lucian's lips twitched in what almost looked like a smile, but it faded quickly. Pride and caution took over again. He was a man used to controlling every situation, yet here, he was helpless, dependent on someone he barely knew. And that scared him. Night passed slowly. Alara stayed near him, keeping watch as he rested. She could hear his shallow breathing, feel the tension in his body, and sense the storm in his mind. Outside, the city whispered, as if it knew something monumental was unfolding. In the early hours before dawn, Lucian woke fully. The wound she had treated was no longer fresh, the bleeding stopped, but his body still ached. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time the armor around his heart seemed to crack. "You didn't have to help me," he said quietly. "Most would have walked away or—" His voice trailed off, dark and uncertain. "I couldn't," she said simply. "Even if I wanted to, I don't turn away from people in pain." He studied her, trying to measure her strength, her limits, her fear, but he could see none. She was calm, resolute, unafraid, even in the face of a man who carried danger like a cloak, and that unnerved him. "You're brave," he said finally, almost a whisper. "Or foolish." "Maybe both," she replied with a faint, ironic smile. The first light of dawn touched the city, the storm finally easing, leaving wet streets and the smell of rain in the air. Lucian rose slowly, feeling the weakness in his body, but also a strange sense of something new, a fragile bond, a trust forming where none should exist. "I should go," he said, his voice low. "It's not safe for me here." "Where will you go?" she asked, though part of her already knew she wouldn't like the answer. "Somewhere no one can find me," he said. "Somewhere, alone." Elara looked at him, feeling an ache she could not name. She wanted to keep him, to protect him, to understand the layers of pain and power he carried. But she knew she could not force him. "Not yet. Take this," she said, handing him a small charm she had crafted. "It's nothing magical, but it will remind you of safety, and maybe that someone cares." Lucian took it reluctantly, his fingers brushing hers again. The connection lingered, heavy and dangerous. "Why do you care?" he asked, almost too quietly to hear. "Because it matters," she said, her eyes steady, even when it shouldn't. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then, without another word, he turned and left into the misty streets, his figure fading into the gray light of morning. The city swallowed him, leaving only the echo of his presence behind. Elara closed her door slowly, heart pounding, hands still tingling from his touch. She felt a strange unease, a feeling that her life had shifted in ways she could not yet understand. The house seemed quieter, yet somehow charged, as if it knew that something dangerous and extraordinary had entered her life. And then, she noticed it. A mark on her doorframe, subtle, almost invisible, like a symbol etched in shadow. She didn't know what it meant, but her blood ran cold. Outside, the city stirred, whispers of power and vengeance growing louder. Somewhere beyond the streets, enemies were moving, watching, waiting. And Lucian was already leaving trails of danger behind him, trails that would inevitably lead back to her. Elara sank into a chair, staring at the rain-streaked window. Her home, her sanctuary, was no longer just hers, and deep down she knew that the calm of the night had been only an illusion. The storm had not ended. It had only just begun. She clutched the charm in her hand, feeling the weight of it, feeling the fragile thread of trust that now bound her to a man of shadows, danger, and secrets. She didn't know if she was ready, but somehow she also knew she had no choice. The next day would come, and with it, the consequences of choices neither she nor Lucian could yet see. The city held its breath, waiting, watching. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of footsteps, hundreds of them, began to echo toward her home. Alara's heart skipped a beat. She could not see them yet, but she knew. Something had been set in motion, something unstoppable, and it was coming for her. The storm had passed, but the real danger was just beginning. The sun had barely risen when Elara heard the first echoing footsteps outside her home. At first she thought it was her imagination, a tremor from the storm the night before. But the sound grew louder, hundreds of steps, heavy and deliberate, moving through the wet streets. Her heart pounded. She ran to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the courtyard and the path to her door were filled with men. 200 of them, dressed in dark coats and boots, faces hidden beneath hoods. They moved in perfect formation, silent and threatening. Elara stepped back, gripping the small charm Lucian had left her. Her mind raced. Why are they here? She whispered to herself. The house, her sanctuary, felt suddenly fragile, exposed. A shadow fell across the doorframe. Lucian appeared, his coat still wet from the rain, his expression unreadable. His eyes softened as they met hers, but there was an unmistakable edge of power, authority, and warning in his gaze. "They are not here to harm you," he said quietly, though the weight of his words did little to ease her fear. "But you must stay calm. Follow my instructions and nothing will happen." Elara nodded, swallowing hard. The air seemed charged, almost alive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She could sense it, the subtle shifts in energy. Her own presence, her powers, however small, reacting to the danger outside. Lucian moved to the center of the courtyard, raising his hand slightly. The men paused, their heads turning toward him. Even from inside, Elara could feel the tension, the unspoken command in every gesture he made. This was not a simple attack. It was a test, a statement of control and loyalty. "Elara," he said, his voice low but firm, "you must trust me completely. You have to stay inside until I give the signal." She nodded, feeling both fear and a strange thrill at being trusted, at being chosen in this dangerous world. The men outside did not move closer. Instead, they formed a tight circle around her home, silent as the grave. The air was thick with anticipation. Hours passed slowly, the city quiet except for the soft whispers of rain on stone. Ilara tended to her plants, prepared her herbs, and kept watch through the windows. Every shadow, every movement outside made her pulse quicken. Lucian returned before noon. "They respect boundaries," he said, more to himself than to her. "But the message is clear. You are under my protection now, whether you want it or not." Ilara studied him. His calm authority, his strength, even his dark reputation, it all terrified her and drew her in at the same time. Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You don't owe me anything." "Perhaps not," he replied. "But I have seen few people who act with courage without expecting reward. And you? You did not hesitate to help me even when it could have been your last act." Her chest tightened. His words were more than gratitude. They carried respect, something she had not often received. "I only did what was right," she said quietly, unsure if her voice was trembling from fear or the strange pull she felt toward him. Lucien looked at her long and hard. "Courage is rare," he said finally, "and so is trust. You have both, and that makes you dangerous, in a way I do not fully understand." Ilara felt a strange warmth spread through her. Dangerous, yes, but in his eyes she also saw admiration. It unsettled her and yet made her heart race. The men outside shifted suddenly. A rival faction of the city, aware of Lucian's movements, attempted to approach. The air snapped with tension. Lucian moved to the door, signaling her to step back. "Stay inside. Do not be seen. You are the shield and the light at the same time," he said, almost as if speaking a prophecy. She obeyed, peering through the cracks of the shutters. From her vantage point, she saw the clash begin. Lucian's men moved with precision, repelling the intruders without harming them unnecessarily. It was not just force, it was strategy, discipline, and loyalty forged through fear and respect. Ilara felt a surge of admiration. She had seen cruelty and violence before, but here was a man who wielded power with restraint, who protected rather than destroyed when he could, and yet, he was still a man carrying a past darker than the stormy night they first met. Hours passed. The attackers retreated. The courtyard grew quiet once more, and Lucien returned to her side, his coat damp and hair clinging to his forehead. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her as though measuring her spirit. "You survived?" he said finally, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Not many could have faced this without fear or despair. "I was inside," she replied, feeling her cheeks flush. "I didn't fight anyone." "That is not courage," he said softly, stepping closer. "Courage is more than fighting. Courage is standing strong when the world is against you, when you cannot see what comes next. That is what you have shown." Ilara's heart raced, a mixture of relief, fear, and something deeper she could not name. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, but something held her back, a respect, a tension, the unspoken dangers that surrounded him. Lucian extended his hand, gently brushing hers as he handed her a small piece of parchment. "This is a warning," he said. "Your life is bound to mine now. There will be enemies you cannot see, forces you cannot imagine, but I will stand by you. And perhaps you can do the same for me." Her fingers trembled as she held the paper. The words were simple, yet they carried weight and promise. "I will," she whispered, unsure if it was meant for him, herself, or both. For a moment the world seemed to pause. Rain glistened on the leaves outside, sunlight breaking through the clouds, casting golden reflections on the wet streets. Ilara realized she had changed in the last 24 hours. She had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, yet she had survived, and in the process she had found something she did not expect: connection, trust, and the first hint of hope. Lucian stepped closer, his gaze holding hers. The tension between them was palpable, charged with unspoken words, shared danger, and a strange longing neither wanted to name yet. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "Do you know that?" "I only do what I must," she replied, though her voice betrayed the admiration she could not hide. He nodded, a small, rare smile touching his lips. "Perhaps we are alike," he said softly. "Survivors in a world that expects weakness, yet we find strength in the smallest gestures, in trust, in care, in courage. Ilara's breath caught. There was a poetry to his words, a myth-like quality, as though they were two characters in a story far greater than themselves. And in that moment she realized that danger, darkness, and power could be transformed by simple acts of compassion. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the edge of the courtyard. Ilara's eyes widened, her heart leaping. Another threat? But Lucian's hand was on her shoulder, firm, protective. "Do not fear," he said. "I am here, and no one will harm you while I stand." She nodded, trusting him completely for the first time. The house seemed to breathe around them, walls steeped in protective energy, reacting to their bond, their courage, their resolve. The rival factions may have been pushed back, but the city was alive with whispers. Ilara and Lucian stood together, bound by trust, courage, and an unspoken connection that neither fully understood yet. Danger would come again. Forces beyond their knowledge would test them. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of the siege, they had survived. Together. Lucien finally turned to leave, but his eyes lingered on her. "The storm is not over," he said, voice low and serious. "But we are stronger than it. Remember that." Ilara watched him go, a mixture of fear and longing swirling in her chest. She knew the days ahead would be filled with trials, choices, and danger. But she also knew that for the first time in her life, she was not alone. And as the sun broke fully over the city, casting light on rain-soaked streets and shadowed alleys, Ilara understood the truth. The storm had passed, but their story, their bond, their trust, and the dangers they would face together was only beginning.